Hey everybody, Matt from Eastwood. We're here in the Eastwood garage doing another live tech session with you guys. Today we're going to be working on doing some tech on some metal finishing. So if you guys haven't watched one of these before, we try and make it pretty darn interactive, so we allow the chat to be open on both YouTube and Facebook. As always, we have Scott over here on the chat.
Yep, so make sure you get your questions in, that way we can get you guys answered. And also on Facebook, we still have our weekly drawing for entering your car picture, so make sure you get your cars in there no matter whether they're finished or not, because we want to see them. So let's see your shaved door handle, Matt.
So today we are, like I mentioned, working on showing you guys just a little portion of a larger video that we're doing. So for the past week or so, we've been working on and off on doing shaving the door handle. I always ask in a lot of these videos for you guys to send your suggestions in for projects that you may have that you want to see us do. One that's come across quite often is shaving door handles. People wanted to see the process. So we took this truck door and in a previous week on the last live that we did, we showed where I was welding in the piece and getting everything fit, welding it in. Now we did a little bit of hammer and dolly work, and we're working on finishing out the panel and getting it ready for a skim coat of filler and some primer. So I'm going to show you guys a little tip for working out the welds when you're doing finishing a panel. Now I TIG welded this panel in. You could MIG weld it in as well if you'd like, depending on the level of finish you're looking for. But no matter if you're TIG welding or you're MIG welding, the metal is always going to warp, and what you're going to get is you're seeing these little areas that are black on either side. So what I did is I sprayed the panel down with our guide coat, with Eastwood guide coat. So normally you'd use this guide coat, or most commonly for when you're doing body work, when you're doing primer and you're trying to check yourself to make sure that the panel is straight. You would dust this over it, sand it down, and it'll kind of give you an idea of where you may be low or high and where you need to sand more. You can use this as well for when you're in bare metal doing metal work where you're sanding out the metal or hammer and dollying. You can use this as well. So what I did is I sprayed the whole panel down with the guide coat, let it dry, and went over it with the file to give me an idea of where it was really badly out of shape, and I've been slowly working my way over. So you can see in here, this area is pretty much finished out, where you can barely see any type of weld at all. There's a couple little tiny pits, but that's about it. So you can take it this far if you have the time and you want to take it this far. It is completely possible. It takes a lot of time, but it can be done. I'm going to show you in this little area here that I haven't finished out fully here how to do that and how to overcome these areas that are really low on either side of a weld, because it's really difficult to get in there with a hammer and dolly and get those areas up. So the tool that I use for this is the Eastwood Bullseye Picks. So this is a tool that we've sold for quite a long time and is something that is used a lot in higher end auto body shops, metal shaping and coach building shops. This is something that's used. This is used mainly just for finish work. So how this works is there's a little, where it gets its name, there's like a bullseye right here, this half round area where the bottom side, the pick side, comes up and touches the metal. So you lift it up and it touches, and what you can do is you put the pick side underneath of the panel to where we can't get easily with the dolly and swing the hammer at the same time, and then we're looking in that bullseye area to see exactly where we want to hit with the pick. So it kind of gives us an area to hit in, so we know where we're going to be swinging and hitting. So what you want to do is put a little bit of pressure down with your hand, just like you would with a hammer and dolly, and you want to swing the pick side up lightly. And I generally hit kind of progressively harder, and if you use the light and the reflections of the light, you can kind of start to see where it's hitting. So I'm aiming for this little spot right in here. Actually, I'm going to probably work this whole area real quick and try and pick it up. And you can turn and just get whatever position you need to get to work those areas. So I can see in here I'm raising that area up. And the key is you're not swinging real hard. If you swing too hard and it's thin metal like this 20 gauge, you could actually puncture the metal because it is kind of a, not sharp, but it's a little pointed on the end of the tool. So I hit a little bit in there. I'll work this. Work that spot there. And if you're afraid that you might have hit it a little too high in there, or you think maybe you put a little spot that's a little too high, what you can do to even it all out, if you can get underneath, is you can take a slapper. Oop, there it is. So we can take a slapping spoon like this, and what this is you're hitting a large area instead of hitting with a hammer, and it's kind of smoothing everything out. It's ironing it out. So I'm going to use the dolly on the bottom side. I'm using one of our doorknob dollies here, and I'm going to put that on the underside and just lightly slap with this, and this is kind of smooth out that area that we picked up, just to kind of give it a nice smooth finish before we hit it with the file. So all that's doing is just ironing out any little high pick marks, just smoothing them out a little bit. Now what I'm going to do is hit this area with the file. So I'm using one of our body files. Sometimes it's called a Vixen file. And these come in flat and curved. This is a flat one that I'm using here. And it is, it's two-sided. So believe it or not, this file will go dull if you do a lot of this type of work, especially if you're working steel. These will start to get dull, these teeth. What you can do is take the screws out, flip it over, and you get a whole new set of teeth out of that. So when you buy these, you do get 2 chances with these, so it does last quite a while. This is pretty aggressive. You're not pushing real hard. So all I'm doing is going over that area fairly lightly to try and highlight any spots that may be really high or really low. And what I'm focusing on is right in that weld where we had those real low spots, and we're trying to get the scratches to kind of, cover that whole entire area. So you can see already these little spots here are getting smaller where I was hitting it with the pick in there. Now we're going to, out in here a little bit, we'll start to smooth out as we bring it up around in the center. But right in here, we're getting a little better. So I'll hit it with a file just a little more, but I can see right in here, right in that spot right there close to the weld, it's pretty low in there and right there. So we can work that with the pick, with the bullseye pick, and get that a little higher. But by starting with the guide coat, it's going to stay in those real low areas for the whole entire time as you're working it, and you're not sanding that off. If you're working this big whole entire area, once you start getting really close to a perfect metal finished finish, you may have to reapply it. But for doing the work that we're doing now, it's going to stay in there until we get it worked all the way out, which is really nice. So we're following that. You can use the scratches as well as the guide coat to kind of help you along. And if you have any questions, I'm going to do a little bit more here, and then we can answer some questions if you guys have them. Shoot them over to Scott. So sometimes I work up in a line as I go to try and fill in. So this is an area where it is a little bit bigger that needs to be raised up. So what I'll do is I'll work up in a line, just hitting the same, just like you would with a hammer, and that kind of raises that whole area up. So I can feel we're getting that raised up there. I'll use the slapper. And you'll listen for the ringing. That means we're hitting metal on metal and it's getting nice and flat there. Any questions, Scott, before I start filing?
Yeah, no, we're cruising along, but one of the things that's important to note, that, and it's good you're about ready to start filing, is if you noticed in the beginning, Matt was filing 2 directions, just like your standing body filler, because it's important not to constantly file the same direction, so you get that kind of X pattern.
Yeah, that's good to cover it so that you're not...
Yeah, you don't want to dig, otherwise you'll dig a hard line through your work and you're just made more work for yourself. The other question somebody did ask was from section, or part 1, you know, what that gauge was used to make sure you made the same profile with your patch piece. And we actually used one of our profile gauges for that one.
Yeah, we have a couple different profile gauges that we offer. We have the pin style that we used. We also have a contour gauge, which has a bunch of different knobs that you can loosen, and has a real thin piece of metal that you can lay on the panel to set a curve. But since this was a kind of smaller area that we work in, I was using the pin style contour gauge. You can get in 3 different lengths, and you can actually screw them together and kind of daisy chain them to make a longer piece if you'd like to do it that way. So any of those are good. Anytime that you can find a piece adjacent to where you're working that you can find the contour and get that duplicated to a piece of paper so you can check your work as you're going, it's going to help. If we laid a flat piece in here and it started welding, we were going to really have big issues with it, the panel not matching. So at least when you start with something that's really close, when you weld it in and it warps, you can work it back to the same shape again. It'll kind of have a memory, and that's why we put it in the English wheel and stretched it up a little bit, because it actually stretches the panel and it gets it into that shape, and it's going to give it a memory to the panel so that we can work it back up to where it needs to be. So do a little sanding here. So we can see those real bad areas that look just like this one for anybody to join in. I don't know if Joe, you can get a little more over top. But for anybody joined in, we are having a bunch of spots like that. So when you're welding something in, these aren't too bad because I TIG welded in and I hammered and dollied a little bit. But if you're MIG welding or TIG welding, this is something that pretty much everybody runs into. You get these little real low areas on either side of the weld. And a lot of people fill them in, but if you want to take a little bit extra time, you can pick them up with the Bullseye Picks. So they started out looking like this. You can see these ones out here, we're left with just little tiny, tiny pits that we can sit here and work out with the Bullseye Pick if we want. And I'll try and work these couple out a little better, but you can see around this corner here, this was all welded, and it looked like all of these when we started. It was real low on either side of it, and as we hammer and dolly and pick, you can work it out and get it real nice. And like this spot in the center, we could probably work that as well with the pick or with the bullseye, or I'm sorry, with the hammer and dolly. But I'm going to work those a little more. We do offer the Bullseye Picks in 3 different sizes. I have the 2 out that I use most commonly, the small and medium size here. These are probably the most common ones you're going to use. And the smaller, the better for when you're using a Bullseye Pick, because it's a little easier to be accurate. So we make one that's just a little bit longer for that than this. That's good if you're doing a chop on a roof or something like that, or a big panel like a hood where you can't get these in. But it's a little more difficult since you're reaching way out to be over top of it to see the bullseye area. So try and pick one of these that that is going to be the smallest that you can use for that job because it's a little easier to control. But these are my two favorite, the small and the medium, but it's good to have all three on hand because inevitably there's going to be a time where you're going to need the larger one at some point. So see if we can get these little nitpicky ones out. And all I'm doing is just kind of trying to look at the reflection, and you'll see the metal start to move up a little bit. That's when you know you're getting close. And this has a spring built into it that's hard to see, but inside of it here there's a little spring on the back side. Whoop, there we go. Right there, there's a little spring, piece of spring steel in there, so that lets it actually return as you're hammering with it, which is really nice. So you're kind of just squeezing it and it's going to bounce back as you go, so it makes it a little easier to do those real quick picking up of it. Try and work. And let's see. All right. So I'm going to finish these last couple out. If you have any more questions, shoot them over to Scott, and Scott can answer those questions, or you can shoot them to me. And we'll try and get this corner finished out a little more, and then we'll show you where we're at. So we'll use our slapper just to kind of smooth out any real high pick marks where I might have swung just a little too hard. Another thing you can use is you can use our slappers here that we have that have a file. It's actually a file built into them. So what this does is this will, as you slap on it, it shrinks just a little bit because it gathers the metal because of it being like a file. And it also, what it does is it highlights the areas that are high, kind of like we're doing with the file. So I can hit. And you can start to see, I don't know if we'll be able to see that. It might be hard. I can hit a little more if we need to. It starts to put just little tiny indentations in the panel, and it's kind of showing you where the panel might be low. So if you start hitting a big area and there's a big area where the file isn't hitting, it's not getting textured, then you know that area is really low. So that's looking pretty good. I'll hit it with the file and then we'll hit it with the DA to show you how it comes out. So now we're really getting rid of all those little spots there. And we'll just hit it with the DA to clean it up a little bit to show you guys where it's at. If you have any questions, shoot them over to Scott. Do you have any questions at all, Scott?
Yeah, while you're taking a break to grab the airline there, they're wondering if you think you could take this all the way to the point where you could do it no filler, just high build primer.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. On a door handle, the one thing that you run into that's a little difficult, and this one, I'm going to probably use just a skim coat. In here where the door jamb is, you really can't get any sort of tool in there. So if you guys make sure you watch, in a week or so we'll have the complete video. And one trick I use is I use a stud gun to pull up any real bad low areas. To get it so that there's zero filler, you may have to actually cut a little window in the door so you can get a dolly in there and hammer and dolly it. The area over, probably about 3/4 of this, I can get to, no problem. I can metal finish this so that basically would need zero filler. A high build primer would take care of it. But this area that you just can't get to, you either need to cut the door open and get in there or use a small skim coat. There is no problem with using a small skim coat on this panel as long as you're using it and you're not globbing it on and doing 3/4 of an inch thick or something crazy. You can do that. But this could be finished all the way out, metal finished. We're showing you the process. I mean, basically this corner and this half here, once I hit this with the DA, could probably be a high build primer and you could block it out and it wouldn't be too horribly far off. So I was just using some 80 grit to get it so you guys can see where we're at. There's a little spot there and there I can see is still a little low that we'll need to get the hammer and dolly in and work out. But you can see in this area, in this corner, the weld seam was, actually draw it on, it might be hard to see. The weld seam went right along like that. So you can see from here all the way to pretty much here, the area that I've really been focusing on, you can barely see the weld seam at all at this point. There's a couple little pits in there that, again, if we want to spend the time with the pick, we could pick those up certainly and get that absolutely perfect. And then we would go over the panel with a slapping spoon and work out any light waves or anything that's in the panel overall, and it'll all start to fall in place and it'll match the contour of the door. But this door, right in here, it's starting to get pretty good. It's matching the contour. Yeah, so you can certainly get it that nice if you want to. It's just doing this process that I'm doing here where you're using the bullseye pick, the slapper, the file, going back and forth till you get to the point where it's absolutely perfect. So it takes time. It isn't necessary, but I like to show you guys that this is possible. If you want to take it that far and you have the time, you definitely can do it. If you're in a production type shop, this 100% does not make sense because you will not make money doing it this way. But that's why a lot of guys use a skim coat of filler. But it's good to be able to take it, from perfect to in between so you can pick a spot where it's acceptable for you. In a spot like this, we don't want a lot of filler because of it being a door and near an edge of a door. We want to use as little bit as possible. So taking the time to finish it out to about this good would be good because then you're putting as little filler on the door as possible. Any other questions?
Yeah, we're good.
Cool. So that's all I got for today, guys. Again, make sure you guys check in with us. This is just a little portion of a longer video that we're doing. If you guys want to see a little bit more on welding and panels and metal finishing today, we have a video on our YouTube channel where I did a eyebrow patch for a Tri-5 Chevy. Where we fit the patch in, TIG welded in, metal finished it to the point where it would basically just need primer. So you guys can watch that video as well. But make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel and you guys can get notifications for when the video for this door will come out and you can see how it turned out. That's all I got, guys. I appreciate it. Thanks. Catch you later.